It's difficult to find the right words to speak about Tisha B'Av. It's such a depressing time, but this has been a depressing year in terms of the terrible calamities that took place in Eretz Yisrael on October 7th, the aftermath of the Milchama, the rise in anti-Semitism. We can really feel very strongly the notion of what was predicted to Klal Yisrael, as the Gemara in Tainus, Daf Kuf Tes Amud Aleph says, after the Chet HaMeraglim, when we weren't prepared to trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to enter into Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atem b'chisem b'chiyah shel chinam, v'ani kovei lachem b'chiyah l'doros. You've cried for no good reason, and therefore I'm going to establish a crying throughout the generations. This is the crying that we continue to have up until this day on Tisha B'Av. So I wanted to share just an insight that I gleaned from the words of the Ramban on this particular medrash, this particular statement in the Gemara. The Ramban asks that we see that in fact at the time of the Chet HaMeraglim, Klal Yisrael, Tisa Kol Ha'eda, they all lifted up their voices, Vayitnu Es Kolam, Vayivku Ha'am B'layla Hahu, they all cried during that night. We see that they cried. Where do we see in the parsha of Shalach dealing with the Chet HaMeraglim that there was this decree that was issued from up high that Ani kovei lachem b'chiyah l'doros? Obviously the Meraglim were punished. Those who were in the Midbar at the time were told that they're going to die in the Midbar over the course of the 40 years. But Midbar is yiplu figreichem. But where do we see that there was a decree that for future generations there would be this tragedy of Tisha B'Av? So Ramban says something very interesting. He says that when the congregation was crying out, so part of what they said was that Nashenu v'tapenu yiyu lavaz, that our wives, our children will be taken into captivity. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded to that later on when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that the people who cried out wouldn't make it to Eretz Yisrael. They would in fact die in the Midbar. So he said, V'tapchem asher amartem lavaz yeh. Now, those children that you said that they're going to be taken into captivity, you know what? I'm actually going to bring them into Eretz Yisrael. They're going to know the land. They're not going to be taken captive. You're the ones who revile the land, not your children. Your children will in fact enter into Eretz Yisrael. It says the Ramban, you can read this a little bit differently as well. They'll know superficially the land. They're not going to know the land necessarily for all of eternity. This is the idea. Even the children that you spoke about, you were worried that they will be lavaz. At a certain point in time, I'm going to visit the iniquities of the fathers upon the children. Of course, when they're eventually going to sin themselves down the road, during the Beis HaMikdash period, first Beis HaMikdash, second Beis HaMikdash, they're going to be punished to be lavaziyeh. However, I am going to give them the opportunity. You didn't trust that you would enter or that your children would enter. I'm going to enable them to enter into the land, but they're also going to be held responsible if they do not perfect their deeds while they are in Eretz Yisrael. In fact, this was always an ongoing concern and a recurring theme of the transgression of the Dor HaMidbar, even with respect to the Chet of Adas Korach. The Ramban writes that one of the accusations of Dasan Ba'aviram was that Kigam Zarenu Lo Yetze Min HaMidbar Liolam. We don't think our children are going to enter into Eretz Yisrael either. That just like the parents won't enter, the children won't enter either. We see that this kind of nagging fear and doubt and lack of trust, not only with respect to the Dor generation that might have sinned, but even with respect to future generations, this was one of the major transgressions that led to this Bechiyah L'Doros, of this crying throughout all of the future generations. We are right now in a situation where many are in a state of despair. state of despondency? How can we hold on to Eretz Yisrael? How can we look happily into the future? How can we plan to go into Eretz Yisrael with all of the challenges around us, all of the vagaries and vicissitudes and the anti-Semitism that surround us? So during this period of time of Bein HaMetzarim, which HaMetzarim, Rashi, Megillas Eicha, understands is also a reference not just to a period of hardship of tzara, but to Gevulim Shel Sada V'Chorim, that this is a reference to the very Gevulim of the land of Israel. It's a time in which we have to reinforce our faith in the Meitzarim. That's why we read, according to some Meforshim, Matus Maseh during this period of time that tells us about the Gevulim, the boundaries of the land. It's a time for us not to despair. It's a time for us to have full faith that whatever difficulties we're going through, our children will be able to be in the land. God willing, we should be able to be in the land, but we should come with our children into the land. We should have faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to provide future generations with the land for all of eternity. It is with that sense of faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we can correct Vayivku Aham B'Layla Hahu, that Bechia, that was a Bechia Shel Chinam, it was a crying, it was a despair that was not based upon reality, it was not based upon the faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we're supposed to have. That will enable us to merit what it says in the Pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Ko Amar Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Rachus Mevaka Abanel, for this Bechia that we're still having, Mini kolek mi bechi, ve'inayach min dima, ki yesh sochar lefulatech num Hashem, v'shavu me'eretz oyev, v'yesh tikva le'acharitech num Hashem, v'shavu v'anim ligvulam. And your children, all future generations of Klal Yisrael, will return to their land. We have to have that faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu now, and that faith should enable us to be rewarded with the immediate and speedy building of the permanent Beis HaMikdash for all of eternity afterwards.